Story 1. The Woman on Highway 50. Marcus Brennan had been driving cross-country routes for 18 years, and Highway 50 through Nevada was one he knew like the back of his weathered hands. The stretch they called the loneliest road in America lived up to its name most nights, especially during the winter months when even the occasional tourist traffic disappeared. Marcus preferred it that way. The solitude gave him time to think, to listen to his audiobooks, and to appreciate the stark beauty of the high desert under moonlight. It was February 14th, 2019, around 2:47 a.m. when he first saw her. His dash camera captured the timestamp, something he'd review obsessively in the weeks that followed. The temperature outside was 19 degrees, and a light snow had begun falling an hour earlier, dusting the asphalt with a thin layer of white that reflected his headlights. Marcus was hauling electronics from Sacramento to Denver, making good time with minimal stops. His CB radio had been silent for over 3 hours, the last communication being a brief exchange with another driver near Austin. The woman appeared suddenly in his high beams, standing on the right shoulder about 200 yards ahead. Marcus eased off the accelerator, his years of experience making the response automatic. She wore a white dress that seemed to glow in the headlights, thin and summery, completely inappropriate for the weather. Her dark hair hung long and loose around her shoulders, and even from a distance, Marcus could see she was barefoot. His first thought was an accident, maybe a domestic situation gone wrong, someone fleeing an abusive partner. He'd encountered similar scenarios before, though never in such a remote location. He checked his mirrors, confirming no other vehicles were visible in either direction, then began applying his brakes. The air brakes hissed as his 18-wheeler gradually slowed, the weight of the cargo requiring a long stopping distance. As he drew closer, details emerged that made his stomach tighten with unease. The woman wasn't shivering. At 19 degrees, wearing nothing but a thin summer dress, she should have been hypothermic, shaking uncontrollably if she was even still conscious. Instead, she stood perfectly still, her arms at her sides, watching his truck approach with an expression he couldn't quite read. Her skin looked pale, almost luminous in the artificial light, but it wasn't the bluish tint of someone dying from cold exposure. Marcus brought the truck to a complete stop about 30 feet from her position, setting his parking brake and leaving the engine running. He grabbed his heavy flashlight and his phone, checking the signal. 1 bar, enough for a call if needed. He opened the door and climbed down from the cab, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Ma'am, you all right?" His voice sounded too loud in the quiet of the desert night. The only other sounds were the idle of his diesel engine and the soft whisper of snowflakes hitting the pavement. She turned to face him fully, and Marcus felt his heart rate spike. Her eyes were wrong. Not obviously wrong, not glowing or red or any of the silly horror movie effects he'd seen, but wrong in a subtle way that his brain struggled to process. They seemed too dark, too deep, like looking into wells that went down forever, and she still wasn't shivering. "I need a ride," she said. Her voice was clear, calm, almost melodic. No chattering teeth, no distress. "Please, I need to get to Austin." Austin was back the way he'd come, about 60 miles west. Marcus glanced at his truck, then back at the woman. Every instinct he'd developed over nearly 2 decades on the road was screaming at him that something was profoundly wrong with this situation. "Ma'am, you need medical attention. You're not dressed for this weather. I'm going to call for help." He pulled out his phone. "Don't." The word wasn't threatening, but it carried a weight, that made Marcus's thumb freeze over the screen. "Please, just take me to Austin. I'll explain on the way." He should have called anyway. He should have gotten back in his truck and driven away. But something about her voice, about the pleading quality beneath the calm surface, made him hesitate. And in that moment of hesitation, she walked toward him. Her feet left no impressions in the thin snow. Marcus looked down at the ground between them, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. His own boots had left clear tracks in the dusting of white. The woman's bare feet should have left even clearer impressions, but the snow where she'd walked remained pristine, undisturbed. "What?" he started to say, but she cut him off. "I'm not going to hurt you, Marcus. I just need to get home." He hadn't told her his name. His name tag was on his jacket, but it was dark, and she hadn't been close enough to read it. The flashlight shook slightly in his hand. "How do you know my name?" She smiled, and the expression was sad, infinitely weary. "I know a lot of things. I know you had a daughter named Emma. I know you lost her 6 years ago to leukemia. I know you still carry her picture in your wallet, and you talk to her sometimes when you're driving alone at night." The flashlight slipped from Marcus's numb fingers, landing in the snow with a soft thump. Emma, his Emma, dead at 15, taking a piece of his soul with her when she went. He'd never fully recovered, never fully healed. And this stranger was speaking her name on a deserted highway in the middle of the Nevada night. "Who are you?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "My name is Sarah Colton. I died on this highway in 1987. I was 19 years old, and I was wearing this dress because I'd been at a Valentine's Day party in Ely. I was driving back to my apartment in Austin when I lost control on a patch of black ice. My car went off the road and rolled. I was thrown through the windshield. They didn't find my body for 3 days." Marcus wanted to run, wanted to jump back in his truck and drive away as fast as his rig could manage, but his legs wouldn't move. He stood rooted to the spot, staring at this woman who claimed to be dead, who left no footprints in the snow, who knew things she couldn't possibly know. "That's not possible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I show up here every year on February 14th, Sarah continued, her voice soft and matter-of-fact. "Right here, on this spot. I don't know why. Maybe it's because this is where I died. Maybe it's because I never made it home, and some part of me is still trying. I've been trying to get a ride to Austin for 32 years, Marcus. Most people drive right past. Some people stop, but they leave when they realize something's wrong. You're the first person in a long time who's actually listened. I don't understand what you want from me." Marcus felt tears starting to form, though whether from fear or grief or the cold, he couldn't say. "I want you to drive me to Austin, or at least drive toward Austin. I don't know if I'll make it all the way. I never have before, but I need to try. And Marcus, if you do this for me, I have a message for you. From Emma." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Marcus felt bile rising in his throat, felt his vision tunneling. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. And yet, the woman stood before him, impossible and present, offering him the one thing he'd wanted more than anything for 6 years. A message from his daughter. "You're lying." But he didn't believe it even as he said it. "Emma wants you to know she's okay. She wants you to know she's not in pain anymore. And she doesn't want you to keep blaming yourself for not being able to save her. She knows you did everything you could. She's proud of you, Dad. And she misses you. But she doesn't want you to spend the rest of your life grieving. She wants you to live." Marcus was crying openly now, his chest heaving with sobs he'd been holding back for years. The words were exactly what Emma would have said, exactly what he needed to hear, but had never been able to believe. Whether this was real, or he was having some kind of breakdown, whether this woman was truly a ghost, or his mind was creating an elaborate hallucination, those words crashed through his defenses and broke something open inside him. "Okay," he heard himself say. "Okay, I'll drive you." Sarah's face transformed with relief and gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Marcus climbed back into his truck on autopilot, his body moving through familiar motions while his mind spun in disoriented circles. Sarah climbed up into the passenger seat with fluid grace, settling in as if she'd done this 1,000 times. She still wasn't shivering. The cab heater was running at full blast, but she showed no reaction to the warmth. He put the truck in gear, released the parking brake, and began the slow process of turning the 18-wheeler around on the empty highway. His hands shook on the wheel. In the passenger seat, Sarah sat quietly, looking out at the desert landscape passing by. "Tell me about Emma," she said after a few minutes of silence. "What was she like?" And Marcus found himself talking. The words poured out of him in a flood. Stories about Emma's childhood, her love of dinosaurs and astronomy, her fierce intelligence and sharper wit. He talked about her diagnosis, the treatments, the hope and despair of those final months. He talked about things he'd never shared with anyone, pain he'd kept locked away in the deepest parts of himself. Sarah listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making soft sounds of understanding. And as Marcus talked, something inside him began to unknot, began to loosen its death grip on his heart. They drove for 40 minutes, covering the distance back toward Austin. Marcus kept glancing at his GPS, watching the miles count down. 40 miles to go, 30, 20. And then, as they passed the 20-mile marker, Sarah spoke again. "This is as far as I go." Marcus looked over at her. "What?" "I can feel it. I can't go any further. This is further than I've made it in years, Marcus. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. Wait, I can drive you the rest of the way. It's just 20 more miles." Sarah shook her head, smiling that sad, weary smile. "I can't. It doesn't work that way. But Marcus, I need you to do something for me. In Austin, on Pine Ridge Road, there's a house. Number 847. My mother still lives there. Her name is Diane Colton. She's 83 years old now. Can you tell her you saw me? Can you tell her I'm still trying to come home?" Yes, I can do that." "Thank you." Sarah reached out and placed her hand on Marcus's arm. He felt the contact, felt pressure and coldness that seemed to seep through his jacket and into his skin. And Marcus, Emma was right. It's time to start living again. You've mourned long enough. Then she was gone, not fading, not vanishing in a dramatic display of supernatural special effects. One moment she was there, her hand on his arm, and the next moment, the passenger seat was empty. The cab temperature, which had felt comfortable a second ago, suddenly seemed too hot. Marcus pulled over onto the shoulder, his whole body shaking now, and sat in stunned silence. He looked at his GPS. He was exactly 20 miles from Austin. He looked at the passenger seat, half expecting to see some evidence she'd been there. But there was nothing. Just the empty seat, the worn upholstery, the seatbelt hanging undisturbed. Marcus sat there for 20 minutes, trying to process what had happened. Then he picked up his phone and searched for Diane Colton in Austin, Nevada. She existed. The address Sarah had given him was real. And when he cross-referenced the name Sarah Colton, with Nevada accident records. He found it. February 14th, 1987. Single, vehicle accident on Highway 50. Sarah Colton, age 19, killed on impact. Body recovered 3 days later. He completed his delivery to Denver 2 days late, calling in and explaining he'd had a personal emergency. His supervisor wasn't happy, but Marcus didn't care. On the return trip, he stopped in Austin. He found 847 Pine Ridge Road, a small house with a well-maintained yard, despite the winter season. An elderly woman answered the door, her white hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes blue and sharp. "Mrs. Colton? Diane Colton?" "Yes. Can I help you?" Marcus told her everything. He expected her to close the door in his face, to call him crazy or cruel. Instead, tears filled her eyes, and she invited him in. She showed him pictures of Sarah, confirmed every detail he'd described. The white dress, the Valentine's Day party, the accident on Highway 50. "She tries to come home every year," Diane said quietly, holding a framed photograph of her daughter. "I don't know why she can't make it. I don't know what keeps her out there. But I've always felt her, every February 14th. I've always known she's still trying." "She wanted me to tell you that," Marcus said. "She wanted you to know she's still trying to come home." Diane cried then, and Marcus cried with her, two strangers bound together by an impossible encounter on a lonely highway. Marcus still drives long haul, still runs routes through Nevada. He avoids Highway 50 on February 14th now, not out of fear, but out of respect. He's kept his promise to Emma, the message delivered through a ghost. He started living again, dating a kind woman he met at a truck stop in Colorado, reconnecting with his son who he'd pushed away in his grief. But sometimes, late at night, when he's alone on empty roads, he finds himself hoping he'll see Sarah again. Hoping she's found her way home at last, and wondering what mysteries lie beyond the veil that separates the living from the dead, and whether love is strong enough to transcend that boundary. Some questions have no answers. Some encounters defy explanation. Marcus has learned to accept that there are things in this world that exist beyond logic, beyond reason, and sometimes, in the darkest hours, those impossible things can bring healing to broken hearts. Story 2. The Burning Man. Jake Peterson had been driving tanker trucks for 11 years, specializing in fuel transport across the Midwest. It was decent money and steady work, though the constant awareness of the danger involved kept him sharp. One wrong move, one moment of inattention, and he could turn his truck into a bomb, capable of incinerating everything within a 100-yard radius. The thought kept him awake on long hauls, kept him cautious at intersections, kept him maintaining his equipment with religious devotion. October 23rd, 2020, found him on Interstate 70 in Kansas, hauling 42,000 pounds of gasoline from Wichita to Kansas City. The weather was perfect, clear, and cool with temperatures in the low 50s. Traffic was light for a Thursday afternoon, just the occasional car or truck breaking up the monotony of endless plains stretching to the horizon. Jake had his music on low, some classic rock station out of Topeka, and was mentally planning the dinner he'd grab at a truck stop near Salina. The accident happened at 3:17 p.m., and Jake's truck-mounted camera captured every second of it. A red sedan, maybe 10 years old, was weaving erratically in the left lane about a quarter-mile ahead. Jake noticed it immediately, his professional instincts flagging the dangerous behavior. The car would drift toward the center line, overcorrect toward the shoulder, then drift back. Drunk driver, Jake thought, or someone texting. He eased off his accelerator, increasing the following distance, preparing to get around the vehicle safely when an opportunity presented itself. Then, the sedan suddenly swerved hard right, crossing both lanes directly into the path of a silver pickup truck in the right lane. The pickup driver reacted instantly, jerking the wheel to avoid collision, but overcorrected. The truck went off the road, rolled 3 times, and crashed into a ravine that ran parallel to the highway. The sedan, meanwhile, spun out and slammed backwards into the guardrail on the left side, coming to rest perpendicular to traffic. Jake was already hitting his brakes, the air system screaming as he brought 40 tons of truck and volatile cargo to a controlled stop. His CB radio came alive with chatter from other drivers who'd witnessed the accident. Someone was already calling 911. Jake pulled onto the shoulder about 200 feet from the sedan, set his parking brake, and grabbed his fire extinguisher and first aid kit. As he ran toward the wreckage, he could see the pickup truck at the bottom of the ravine, smoke beginning to curl from the engine compartment. The sedan was crumpled but relatively intact, driver's side visible. Jake reached it first, approaching carefully. The driver was male, maybe late 40s, unconscious and bleeding from a head wound, but alive, his chest rising and falling. Jake checked for other vehicles or injuries, but the driver appeared to be alone. He was about to check for the pickup driver when he heard a sound from the ravine. A horrible groaning of metal, and then the distinct whoosh of gasoline igniting. The pickup truck erupted in flames. Jake didn't think. He dropped his supplies and ran toward the ravine, sliding down the steep embankment on his heels and palms, dirt and grass staining his jeans. The heat hit him like a wall when he got close, the fire already consuming the truck's cab. Through the shattered windshield, he could see a figure slumped over the steering wheel. "Hey! Hey, can you hear me?" Jake shouted over the roar of the flames. No response. The fire was spreading fast, and Jake knew he had maybe seconds before the fuel tank exploded. He grabbed the driver's side door handle, burning his palm even through his glove, and yanked. The door was jammed shut, bent from the rolling impact. The passenger side was engulfed. The rear was blocked by the ravine wall. Jake had no way to get the driver out. He was about to try breaking the window when the fuel tank went. The explosion threw Jake backwards 15 feet, slamming him into the ravine wall. His ears rang, his vision blurred, and pain radiated from what felt like every part of his body. He lay there gasping, watching as the pickup truck became a roaring inferno, a column of black smoke rising into the clear autumn sky. The driver was dead. Had to be. No one could survive that. Sirens approached in the distance. Jake struggled to his feet, his body protesting every movement. He needed to get back up to the highway, needed to warn emergency responders about the fire, needed to check on the sedan driver. He scrambled up the embankment, his burned hand screaming, his ribs aching from where he'd hit the ravine wall. When he reached the top, emergency vehicles were just arriving. Highway patrol, ambulance, fire truck. Jake gave his statement to a stone-faced officer, explained what he'd seen, described the pickup driver trapped in the burning vehicle. The officer nodded grimly, making notes. They treated Jake's burns at the scene. Superficial first-degree damage to his right palm and fingers. Could have been so much worse. The sedan driver regained consciousness and was transported to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. Jake provided his contact information for the investigation and was told he could continue his route once they'd cleared the scene. 3 hours later, with the fire out and the pickup truck reduced to a charred skeleton, Jake was back on the road. He was shaken, his hand throbbing despite the painkillers the EMTs had given him. But he'd seen accidents before. Not like this, Not this bad, but he knew the routine. File the report, talk it through with his dispatcher, maybe see a counselor if the nightmares got too bad. What he'd witnessed today would stick with him, but he'd process it, deal with it, and move forward. He was wrong about that. Jake stopped for the night at a truck stop outside Lawrence, grabbing a shower and a mediocre meal before settling into his sleeper cab. He set his alarm for 4 a.m., giving himself 6 hours of rest before completing the delivery to Kansas City. Sleep came surprisingly easy, exhaustion overriding the adrenaline of the day's events. He woke at 2:37 a.m. to someone knocking on his truck. The sound was distinct, 3 sharp raps on the driver's side door. Jake sat up groggily, confused and disoriented. The truck stop parking lot was well lit, and through his window he could see other trucks parked in neat rows, but he couldn't see who was knocking. He pulled on his jeans and opened the door. A man stood beside his truck, looking up at him from the pavement. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, both blackened and torn. His face was covered in ash and soot, his hair was singed, and his eyes, when they met Jake's, were filled with confused desperation. "I need help," the man said. His voice was rough, damaged. "Please." "I need help." Jake's mind, still foggy with sleep, struggled to process what he was seeing. Something was wrong. Something about this man triggered every alarm bell in Jake's head, but he couldn't quite identify what. "Are you hurt? Do you need me to call 911? Jake reached for his phone. "I can't find my truck," the man said, ignoring the question. "I was in an accident, on the highway. There was a fire. I can't find my truck." Ice water flooded Jake's veins. He looked at the man more carefully, and details snapped into horrifying focus. The burns covering his exposed skin, the way his clothes hung on him, melted and fused in places to his body. The smell, God, the smell of burned meat and gasoline and something chemical that made Jake's stomach heave. You were in the pickup," Jake whispered, "on I-70, this afternoon." The man nodded, relief washing over his features. Yes, you were there. You tried to help me. I remember seeing you before the explosion. Please, I need to find my truck. My phone was in there. I need to call my wife." "You need a hospital," Jake said, his voice shaking. "You need an ambulance right now. Don't move. I'm calling." "No." The man reached up, grabbing Jake's wrist with burned, weeping fingers. The touch was cold, impossibly cold, like touching ice that had been kept in a freezer for years. "No hospitals. I just need to find my truck. Please, help me." Jake yanked his hand back, scrambling backwards into his cab. The man couldn't be standing here. The man couldn't be alive. Jake had seen the fire, seen the explosion, seen what was left of that pickup truck. The driver's body had been visible through the flames, hunched over the wheel, burning. No one had walked away from that. No one could have. "You're dead," Jake said, his voice cracking. "You died in that accident. I saw you die." The man looked down at himself, at his ruined clothes and burned skin, as if seeing it for the first time. His expression crumbled into confusion and grief. "No," he said softly. "No, that's not right. I need to get home. Sarah's making pot roast tonight. It's Thursday. She always makes pot roast on Thursday." "What's your name?" Jake asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "David. David Chen. I live in Topeka. I was driving home from work." David looked up at Jake, and tears were running down his burned face, leaving clean tracks through the soot and ash. "Why can't I remember what happened after the fire?" Jake's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. He pulled up the local news website, searching for information about the afternoon's accident. It took 3 tries, his burned fingers fumbling on the screen. but he found it. The article was brief, posted just an hour earlier. Fatal accident on I-70 near Salina. 1 dead, 1 injured. Victim identified as David Chen, 47, of Topeka. Pronounced dead at the scene. Jake turned the phone around, showing David the screen. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." David read the article, his lips moving silently. Then he looked up at Jake, and the confusion in his eyes transformed into something Jake would see in his nightmares for the rest of his life. Understanding, horror, denial, acceptance, all cycling through in the space of heartbeats. "I'm dead? Yes. But I'm standing here. I'm talking to you. I can feel the cold. I can smell the diesel fuel. How can I be dead?" Jake had no answer. He sat in the doorway of his cab, looking down at this impossible man, this ghost who didn't understand he was a ghost, and felt tears running down his own face. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't know how this is possible." David stood there for a long moment, swaying slightly, his burned hands hanging at his sides. Then he spoke, his voice small and broken. "Will you call Sarah? Will you tell her what happened? She'll be worried. I was supposed to be home 3 hours ago." Yes, I'll call her. Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm sorry I won't be home for pot roast." Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. David looked around the truck stop parking lot, at the rows of trucks and the bright lights, and the 24-hour restaurant building. "I need to go," he said. "I need to go home." "David, wait." But Jake was talking to empty air. David Chen was gone, vanished as completely as if he'd never been there. The only evidence of his presence was a faint smell of smoke, lingering in the cold night air, and the wet handprint on Jake's wrist where David had grabbed him. A handprint that, when Jake looked down at it, showed black residue that looked disturbingly like ash. Jake called David Chen's widow at 6 a.m., after finishing his delivery and sitting in the Kansas City truck stop parking lot for 2 hours, working up the courage. The conversation was brief and agonizing. Sarah Chen already knew her husband was dead. The highway patrol had notified her the previous evening. But Jake told her about seeing David, about the man asking to come home to pot roast. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He loved my pot roast. I made it every Thursday for 23 years. "I'm sorry," Jake said, because there was nothing else to say. "Did he seem... was he in pain?" Jake thought about the burns, the confusion, the terrible moment when David had realized he was dead. "No," he lied. "He just wanted to come home." After he ended the call, Jake sat in his truck and cried. Not the careful, controlled grieving he'd managed after his father's death last year, but ugly, choking sobs that left him gasping and exhausted. He'd seen a dead man walking. He'd spoken with someone who shouldn't exist, couldn't exist, but had been as real in that moment as anything Jake had ever experienced. The story doesn't end there. Jake continued driving, because the bills still needed paying, and running away wouldn't change what he'd witnessed. But 3 weeks later, on a return trip through Kansas, he stopped at that same truck stop. It was just after 2 a.m., and David Chen was there again, standing in the parking lot, looking at the trucks with that same confused expression. "I can't find my truck," David said when he saw Jake. "Have you seen it? I was in an accident." Jake tried talking to him, tried explaining again that he'd died. But David didn't seem to remember their previous conversation. Or maybe he did remember, but couldn't hold on to the knowledge. The human mind is a fragile thing, and perhaps dead minds are even more so. Since then, Jake has encountered David Chen 7 more times, always at that truck stop, always between 2 and 3 a.m., always looking for his truck. Other drivers have seen him too. There are posts on trucker forums about the burned man at Lawrence, discussions about whether it's an urban legend or real. Jake has contributed to those discussions, shared his story, and found others who've had similar encounters. David Chen is trapped in some kind of loop, Jake believes, stuck in the moments after his death, unable to move forward or understand what's happened to him. And every few weeks, when Jake's route takes him through Kansas in the middle of the night, he stops at that truck stop. He talks to David. He tells him it's okay, that Sarah got his message, that she knows he wanted to come home. He doesn't know if it helps. He doesn't know if David can be helped, or if this is just how things are now. But Jake keeps stopping, keeps bearing witness to this impossible tragedy, because he was there when David Chen died. He tried to save him and failed. The least he can do now is acknowledge that David still exists in some form, still matters, still deserves to be seen. Some nights Jake wonders what will happen when he retires, when he stops running this route. Will David still be there, looking for his truck, asking strangers for help? Will he fade away eventually, or is he doomed to repeat this loop forever? Jake doesn't have answers. But he knows one thing with certainty. The line between life and death is not as clear as he once believed. And sometimes people don't realize they've crossed it. Sometimes they just keep trying to go home, not understanding why they can't get there. That's the real horror, Jake thinks. Not the burns or the death or even the ghost, but the confusion, the endless loop of not understanding, of being trapped in the worst moment of your existence and living it over and over without resolution. Jake drives more carefully now. He maintains his truck obsessively, and he prays that when his time comes, whenever that may be, he'll realize what's happened and move on. That he won't be left standing in some parking lot, burned and broken, asking strangers if they've seen his truck. Story 3. The Parallel Highway. Rebecca Torres had been driving for Midwest Distribution for 7 years, running regular routes between Minneapolis and Chicago. She prided herself on her punctuality, her safety record, and her knowledge of every truck stop, rest area, and alternate route along Interstate 90. At 34, she was one of the younger drivers in the company's fleet, and she'd worked hard to earn the respect of her predominantly male colleagues. December 11th, 2021, started as a routine run. Rebecca picked up her load in Minneapolis at 4 a.m., industrial equipment destined for a factory outside Chicago. The weather forecast predicted light snow, nothing unusual for December in the Midwest. She'd driven through far worse. Her truck was maintained to company standards, her GPS was updated, and she had a full tank of diesel. The first 6 hours were unremarkable. Rebecca made good time, stopped for breakfast at a familiar truck stop in Tomah, Wisconsin, and chatted briefly with another driver she recognized from previous runs. The snow started falling around 11 a.m., light and drifting, reducing visibility slightly, but nothing that concerned her. Traffic on I-90 was moderate, trucks and cars moving steadily eastward. At 12:47 p.m., according to her GPS log, Rebecca was approaching the Wisconsin-Illinois border. She remembers checking her mirrors, adjusting her speed for the weather conditions, and thinking about where she'd stop for lunch. The next thing she remembers is a disorienting moment of vertigo, like the brief sensation of an elevator dropping. Except she was moving at 60 miles per hour. The highway changed. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. No flash of light, no sound effect. One moment she was on I-90 in familiar territory, and the next moment, something was wrong. Rebecca couldn't immediately identify what had changed, but her gut insisted something was different. The sky looked slightly off. the angle of the light strange for early afternoon. The snow had stopped, though the ground was covered with it. She checked her GPS. The screen showed her location as I-90, right where she should be. Mile marker 187 approaching the border. But the map looked odd. The exits weren't quite right, the topography slightly altered. Rebecca frowned, tapping the screen. Sometimes GPS systems glitched, especially in bad weather. Then she noticed the vehicles. A truck passed her going westbound, and Rebecca's trained eye immediately noted details. The truck was old, maybe from the 1970s, a model she'd only seen in vintage truck shows. But it wasn't weathered or restored. It looked new, factory fresh. The driver, visible for a moment through the window, wore clothes that seemed oddly styled, like something from an old photograph. Rebecca's heart began to race. She looked around more carefully, studying the eastbound traffic. More old vehicles, interspersed with a few that looked normal. A station wagon that could have come from a 1960s advertisement. A muscle car in pristine condition. And then, making her breath catch in her throat, a truck identical to her own model. Same company logo on the side, but the paint scheme was from 15 years ago, before the company rebrand. The highway itself was wrong too. The pavement was too smooth, too new. The guardrails were an older style that had been phased out in the 2000s. The mile markers, when she passed them, showed numbers that didn't align with her GPS. Rebecca grabbed her CB radio. "This is Big Eagle. Anybody out there on this channel?" She used her handle, keeping her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. Static. Then, "Big Eagle, this is Nighthawk. You got a problem?" Relief flooded through her at the response. "Nighthawk, I'm on I-90 eastbound near the Wisconsin border. Can you confirm traffic conditions? I'm seeing some really weird vehicles here." A pause. "Big Eagle, I'm on I-90 westbound, currently passing mile marker 196. Traffic looks normal from my position." "What kind of weird are we talking about?" "Old trucks, old cars, like vintage but looking brand new." "Nighthawk, what year is it?" Another pause, longer this time. "Big Eagle, are you feeling all right? Do you need me to call for help?" "Nighthawk, please just tell me what year it is." "It's 2021, December 11th. Big Eagle, I really think you should pull over. Maybe you hit your head or something." Rebecca looked at her dashboard clock. 12:51 p.m. 4 minutes had passed since that weird vertigo sensation. She looked at the highway ahead and saw an exit coming up, the sign reading "Next exit 2 miles," in a font that was subtly wrong. "Nighthawk, I'm going to take this next exit and figure out what's going on. Thanks for the assist." 10-4, Big Eagle. Be safe out there." Rebecca maintained her speed, watching the mile markers count down to the exit. Other vehicles passed her, some modern, some from decades past. None of the other drivers seemed to notice anything strange. A woman in a 1980s sedan talked on a cell phone that looked like a prop from a historical drama. A trucker in a vintage rig gave Rebecca a friendly wave as he passed. The exit appeared, and Rebecca took it, carefully downshifting and following the off-ramp. The sign said, "Rest area 1 mile." She'd driven this stretch of I-90 hundreds of times and didn't remember a rest area at this location. But right now, a place to stop and gather her thoughts sounded perfect. The rest area was small, just a parking lot, and a single building that appeared to serve as both restrooms and information center. Rebecca parked her truck, set the brake, and sat for a moment, trying to process what was happening. She pulled out her phone. No signal. Not unusual in rural areas, but combined with everything else, it felt ominous. She climbed out of the cab, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. The building looked new but old-fashioned, its architecture, suggesting it had been built in the 1970s or 1980s. A few other vehicles were parked in the lot. A family in a station wagon, a couple in a compact car, a lone trucker walking toward the building. Rebecca followed him inside. The interior was clean and well-maintained, with tile floors and wood-paneled walls that reinforced the vintage aesthetic. Informational posters on the walls advertised attractions and services, but something about them was wrong. Rebecca stepped closer to examine one. Wisconsin Dells, fun for the whole family. The poster showed families enjoying water slides and attractions. At the bottom, in small print, plan your 1978 summer vacation today. Rebecca felt dizzy. She looked at other posters. 1984, 1991, 2003, 2015, all different years, all presented as if they were current, none more recent than 2015. First time? Rebecca spun around. The trucker she'd followed inside stood behind her, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and kind eyes. He wore a jacket with a company logo she recognized but hadn't seen in years. A freight company that had gone bankrupt in 2012. First time what? Rebecca asked, though she had a sick feeling she knew what he meant. First time on the parallel highway. That's what some of us call it. We all end up here eventually, those of us who keep driving long enough. You get that weird feeling, like you're in an elevator, and then you're here, on a version of the highway that doesn't quite match reality. Rebecca's mouth was dry. How long have you been here? Hard to say. Time works different on this highway. I've been driving for what feels like weeks, but I left on November 3rd, 2012. Based on some of the other vehicles I've seen, I'm guessing it's been a few years in the real world. You're saying we're trapped? That we can't get back? The trucker's expression was sympathetic, but grim. I'm saying it's difficult. Some people figure out how to get back. Most don't. The highway shifts, you see. It's made up of pieces from different times, different versions of I-90. Sometimes you're driving through 1975, sometimes through 2003, sometimes through last week. But it's never quite right. Never quite now. Rebecca felt her legs weaken and leaned against the wall for support. This can't be real. I'm having a breakdown or a stroke or something. You're not. I thought that too at first. But everything here is too consistent to be a hallucination. You can eat the food from the vending machines, though it won't quite taste right. You can sleep in your cab, and time passes normally. You can talk to other drivers, and they all have the same story. That vertigo sensation, then here. Why? What causes this? He shrugged. Nobody knows. Some people think it's a temporal anomaly, some kind of glitch in space-time. Others think it's supernatural, a ghost highway where lost travelers end up. Personally, I think something happened to the road itself, something that fractured it across time, and now we're stuck in the cracks. Rebecca closed her eyes, trying to think logically despite the impossibility of the situation. You said some people get back. How? You have to find the seam, the place where this highway connects back to the real one. It moves, shifts around, but sometimes, if you're in the right place at the right time, you'll feel that elevator sensation again. And if you're lucky, you'll end up back where you belong. How do I find it? Keep driving. Pay attention to how the highway feels. When things start to seem too normal, too consistent, that's usually a sign you're getting close. And watch for your own truck. What? The trucker pointed out the window. In the parking lot, Rebecca could see her truck where she'd parked it. But beyond it, on the highway, another truck identical to hers drove past, heading eastbound. You'll see yourself sometimes, the trucker explained. Versions of yourself from other times, other moments. When you start seeing yourself frequently, You're close to the seam. It means the timeline is looping back on itself, trying to reconnect. Rebecca watched the duplicate of her truck disappear down the highway. This is insane. Yeah, it is. But insane doesn't mean it's not real. The trucker extended his hand. James Mitchell. I used to drive for Reynolds Freight out of Ohio. Rebecca Torres, Midwest Distribution. They shook hands, and the physical contact was grounding, real, solid. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't just in her head. Rebecca spent the next 6 hours driving, following James's advice. She headed east, keeping careful track of the mile markers, watching for patterns. The highway continued to shift around her, different eras bleeding together. She saw modern electric cars driving alongside Model T Fords. She passed exits that led to towns she knew, but when she checked her GPS, the roads didn't quite match the real geography. At 7 p.m., according to her dashboard clock, she started seeing herself. The first sighting was brief, her truck passing by in the opposite direction. Rebecca got a glimpse of herself behind the wheel, her expression focused on the road ahead. The second sighting came 20 minutes later, her truck at a rest area as she drove past. The third was more disturbing. Her truck pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing, and Rebecca herself standing beside it looking at a tire. She kept driving. Around 9 p.m., the frequency of sightings increased. She saw herself every few miles now, always doing slightly different things. Driving, stopped, talking on the CB radio. The timeline was collapsing, looping back on itself in tighter and tighter spirals. And then, at 9:47 p.m., she felt it. That elevator sensation, the brief moment of vertigo. The highway wavered like a heat mirage. Rebecca gripped the wheel, her heart pounding. Come on, she thought. Come on, let me through. The world snapped back into focus, and everything was suddenly, brilliantly normal. The vehicles around her were all contemporary. The mile markers matched her GPS. The highway looked right, felt right. Rebecca grabbed her CB radio with shaking hands. This is Big Eagle. Can anybody hear me? Big Eagle, this is Roadrunner. I've got you. What do you need? Roadrunner, can you tell me the date and time? It's December 11th, 9:48 p.m. You okay, Big Eagle? I'm okay. Thank you, Roadrunner. Just needed confirmation. Rebecca pulled into the next rest area and sat in her truck, shaking with relief and residual terror. She checked her phone. Signal was back. She'd missed 17 calls from her dispatcher, all showing she'd been out of contact for 9 hours. She called in, made excuses about her phone dying and getting turned around in the snow. She didn't tell anyone what had really happened. She completed her delivery to Chicago the next morning, 7 hours late, but otherwise successful. The company issued her a warning for missing her delivery window and for the communication gap. Rebecca accepted it without argument. What was she going to say? That she'd accidentally driven onto a highway that existed outside of normal time. She still drives for Midwest Distribution, still runs routes on I-90, but now she's hyper-aware of that particular stretch of highway near the Wisconsin-Illinois border. And once every few months, she'll feel it. A brief moment of vertigo, a subtle shift in the light, a vehicle that looks out of time passing by. The parallel highway is trying to pull her back in. So far, she's resisted. So far, she stays grounded in the present. But Rebecca knows it's only a matter of time. The highway remembers her. And one day, maybe today, maybe next week, maybe next year, she'll take that drive and feel that elevator drop. And when she does, she doesn't know if she'll find her way back a second time. Some roads, once traveled, never fully release you. They leave a mark, A connection, a doorway that can open again without warning. Rebecca drives with that knowledge every day, and the uncertainty is its own kind of horror. Not knowing when, not knowing if she'll get lucky again, just knowing that somewhere in the shifting timelines and fractured geography, there's a version of I-90 where travelers get lost, and it's waiting for her to return. Story 4. The Last Delivery. Thomas Garrett had exactly 3 weeks left in his career. After 42 years of driving long-haul routes across North America, he was finally retiring. His 60th birthday had come and gone in September. His pension was sorted, and his wife Margaret had already planned their first vacation in decades. A cruise to Alaska she'd been dreaming about for years. Thomas was ready. His body ached in ways it never had when he was younger. His eyes strained under the constant focus required for driving, and he'd seen enough of America's highways to last several lifetimes. This final run was almost ceremonial. Chicago to Seattle, a route he'd driven 100 times. The company had offered to let him finish early, but Thomas wanted to complete one last cross-country haul, wanted to say a proper goodbye to the road that had been his life for so long. January 18th, 2022, he picked up his trailer in Chicago. Electronics, standard cargo. Nothing unusual or problematic. He'd make stops in Billings and Spokane before the final delivery in Seattle. 5 days, maybe 6 if weather slowed him down. Then home to Margaret, to retirement, to the next chapter. The first 3 days went perfectly. Thomas drove through Illinois, Iowa, South Dakota, and into Montana without incident. The weather cooperated, traffic was light, and his truck ran smoothly. He stopped at familiar truck stops, chatted with drivers he'd known for years, enjoyed the routine one last time. Several colleagues who knew about his impending retirement called in on the CB to wish him well, sharing stories and jokes. On the 4th day, January 21st, somewhere in central Montana, on Interstate 90, Thomas picked up a hitchhiker. He never picked up hitchhikers. It violated company policy and basic common sense. But there was something about this particular person that made Thomas pull over against his better judgment. A young man, maybe early 20s, standing beside the highway in weather that was rapidly deteriorating. Snow had started falling an hour earlier, and the temperature was dropping fast. The kid wore a light jacket, jeans, sneakers, completely unprepared for Montana winter. Thomas pulled onto the shoulder about 50 feet ahead of where the hitchhiker stood. He watched in his mirror as the young man jogged toward the truck, and something nagged at Thomas's mind. Something familiar about the way the kid moved. The passenger door opened, and the hitchhiker climbed in with a grateful smile. "Thank you so much. I've been out there for 2 hours. Thought I was going to freeze." "Where are you headed?" Thomas asked, already regretting his decision to stop. "Seattle. I know it's a long shot, but anywhere west is good. I can take you as far as Spokane. After that, you're on your own." "That's amazing. Thank you." The young man extended his hand. "I'm Danny." Thomas shook it, noting the kid's grip was firm despite the cold. "Thomas, you got family in Seattle?" "Something like that. I'm trying to get home." Danny settled into the passenger seat, buckling in. Been on the road for a while now. As Thomas pulled back onto the highway, he studied his passenger in quick glances. There was something odd about Danny's appearance, though Thomas couldn't quite pin it down. The kid's clothes were wrong somehow. Not just inadequate for the weather, but stylistically off. His haircut was dated, and his face, which Thomas swore he'd seen before. "You from around here originally?" Thomas asked. "Illinois. Grew up in a town called Morrison. You probably never heard of it." Thomas's hands tightened on the wheel. Morrison, Illinois. Population about 4,000. Thomas had been born in Morrison, had lived there until he was 18, had left to pursue trucking and never moved back, though his parents had stayed until their deaths. What were the odds of picking up a hitchhiker from his tiny hometown in the middle of Montana? "I know Morrison," Thomas said carefully. "Grew up there myself. Small world." Danny's expression brightened. "No kidding? When did you live there?" "Left in 1980. Haven't been back in years. What about you?" "I grew up in the 60s and 70s. Left in 79. Danny laughed. "Guess we just missed each other." Thomas felt cold. That had nothing to do with the weather. The math didn't work. If Danny had left Morrison in 1979, he'd be at least in his 60s now, not early 20s. Unless... "How old are you, Danny?" 21. Turned 21 last June. The pieces weren't fitting together, and Thomas's unease was growing. He kept driving, but his mind raced. Morrison in the 60s and 70s. A young man named Danny. Why did that ring a bell? "What's your last name?" Thomas asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "Garrett. Danny Garrett." Thomas nearly swerved off the road. He fought to keep the truck steady, his heart hammering against his ribs. Danny Garrett. His older brother's name. The brother who had died in 1979 at age 21. Killed in a car accident 2 weeks before Christmas. Thomas had been 17, still in high school. The loss had devastated their family, and been one of the reasons Thomas had left Morrison so soon after graduation. "Something wrong?" Danny asked, concern in his voice. Thomas forced himself to breathe normally. "No, just... that's my last name too. Garrett. Thomas Garrett." Danny stared at him. "Thomas?" "Tommy. Nobody's called me Tommy in 40 years." "Tommy?" Danny's face had gone pale. "You're Tommy. My little brother Tommy." Thomas pulled onto the shoulder again, unable to drive and process this simultaneously. He set the parking brake and turned to face his passenger. Really face him. And now that he was looking, now that he knew, the resemblance was undeniable. This was Danny's face. This was his brother, looking exactly as he had in the photos from 1979. Young and alive and impossibly present. "You died," Thomas whispered. "December 10th, 1979. Single car accident on Route 78. You were coming home from visiting your girlfriend in Sterling. You hit black ice and went off the road. They said you died instantly." Danny looked down at his hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. "I remember that drive. I remember the ice. The car spinning. Then... nothing for a long time. Then I was walking. Just walking west on highways, trying to get somewhere. I don't know how long I've been walking." 43 years, Thomas said. His voice broke. "You've been dead for 43 years. That can't be right. It feels like maybe a few weeks, maybe months, but not..." Danny looked up at Thomas, and there were tears in his eyes. "Tommy, I'm so confused. What's happening to me?" Thomas had no answers. He sat in his truck on the side of a Montana highway with the ghost of his brother, and nothing in his 4 decades of experience had prepared him for this moment. "Do you remember Mom and Dad?" Thomas asked. "Of course. Mom's probably worried about me. I was supposed to be home by 9. Mom died in 1995. Dad in 2001. I'm 60 years old, Danny. You've been gone for most of my life." Danny flinched as if struck. "No, that's not possible. I'm 21. You're 17. We live in Morrison. I was just driving home from visiting Lisa." "Lisa Hendricks? She's 62 now. Married with grandchildren. Lives in Iowa." "Stop it," Danny's voice cracked. "Why are you saying these things?" Thomas reached out, putting a hand on his brother's shoulder. The contact was solid, real, warm. Not the cold touch of a ghost from storybooks, but the living warmth of flesh and blood. Except Danny wasn't alive, couldn't be alive. And yet here he sat, confused and frightened, and somehow present. "I'm not trying to hurt you," Thomas said gently. "I'm trying to understand this. You've been walking for 43 years, trying to get home. Where is home, Danny? Where are you trying to go?" Danny thought about this for a long moment. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "I just know I need to go west, that I'm looking for something, or someone. I thought maybe Seattle, but I don't know why." Thomas made a decision. "I'm going to Seattle. Let me take you there. Maybe that's where you need to be. Maybe that's where this ends." They drove for 3 hours, in near silence, the snow falling steadily around them. Danny stared out the window at the landscape passing by, occasionally commenting on how things looked different, how the trucks were strange, how he didn't recognize any of the brands on the vehicles they passed. Thomas tried to explain the passage of time, the changes that had occurred in 4 decades, but it was like trying to explain color to someone who'd never seen. Around 7 p.m., they stopped at a truck stop outside Butte. Thomas bought food for both of them, though he noticed Danny barely ate. They sat in a booth in the restaurant, and Thomas talked about their family, about their parents' final years, about his own life, his marriage to Margaret, the career he'd built. Danny listened with an expression of bewildered grief, struggling to understand a world that had moved on without him. "Do you have kids?" Danny asked. "2. Sarah's 34, Ben's 31. You'd have loved them. Sarah's got your sense of humor. Ben drives trucks, followed in his uncle's footsteps even though he never met you." "I wanted kids," Danny said softly. "Lisa and I talked about it. We were going to get married after I finished college, going to have a whole life together." "I'm sorry," Thomas said, and he meant it with everything in him. Sorry for the life Danny had lost, for the decades stolen, for the confusion and pain his brother was experiencing now. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." They got back in the truck and continued west. Somewhere around midnight, crossing into Idaho, Danny spoke again. "I think I understand now. I'm not really here, am I? Not in the way that matters. I'm something left over. An echo or a shadow. Whatever I am, I've been looking for something I lost. Looking for home. But home doesn't exist anymore. I'm here," Thomas said. "I'm real. And I remember you. Doesn't that count as home?" Danny smiled, and it was his old smile, the one Thomas remembered from childhood. Yeah, I guess it does." They drove through the night, and Thomas told Danny everything he could think of. Stories about their childhood, about the pranks they'd pulled and the fights they'd had, about the time Danny had taught Thomas to drive stick shift in their dad's old pickup, about the Christmas when they'd stayed up all night building a snowman that ended up being 12 feet tall, about the funeral and how empty the house had felt afterwards, and how Thomas had kept Danny's jacket hanging in his closet for 10 years before he could finally put it away. Dawn broke over the Idaho mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of pink and gold. Danny watched the sunrise with an expression of peace settling over his features. "It's beautiful," he said. "Yeah, it is. Tommy, I think I'm done walking. I think I found what I was looking for." Thomas felt tears running down his face. "I think you did too." They reached Seattle 2 days later, Thomas taking his time, extending the journey as long as he could. He showed Danny the modern world, pointing out cell phones and computers and all the technology that had emerged in the decades since 1979. Danny marveled at it all, sometimes laughing at the absurdity, sometimes quiet with the weight of all he'd missed. When they finally pulled into the delivery facility in Seattle on January 24th, Thomas knew it was time. He could feel it somehow, a sense of finality in the air. "This is it," Danny said. He didn't sound scared. "I can feel it. I go here." "Where? Where do you go?" "I don't know. Somewhere else. Somewhere I should have gone a long time ago, but I got lost." Danny turned to Thomas, and there was such gratitude in his expression. "Thank you for bringing me home, for remembering me, for telling me about Mom and Dad and the life I missed. It helps, knowing someone carried me forward." "I never stopped missing you," Thomas said through his tears. "Not once in 43 years. I know. I could feel it. Maybe that's why I was still walking. Because you kept me alive in here." Danny tapped his chest, over his heart. "But it's okay to let me go now. It's time." Thomas nodded, unable to speak. Danny opened the passenger door and climbed down. He stood for a moment, looking up at his younger brother, who had somehow become so much older. Then he smiled one last time, waved, and walked away into the Seattle morning. Thomas watched him go, watched as Danny Garrett, 21 years old forever, faded gradually from sight like morning mist burning off in the sun, not vanishing dramatically, just gently becoming less present, less solid, until finally he was gone completely. Thomas sat in his truck and cried for his brother, for the lost decades, for the impossible reunion and the final goodbye. When he finally pulled himself together and went into the facility to complete his delivery, nobody commented on his red eyes or the time he'd taken in the parking lot. Truckers understood grief, understood that sometimes the road brought you things you didn't expect, things you couldn't explain. He retired as planned the following week, had his farewell party, accepted his gold watch, drove his truck back to the company lot for the last time. He told Margaret about Danny, expecting skepticism or concern for his mental state. Instead, she held him and said, "I'm glad you got to say goodbye." Thomas Garrett lives in quiet retirement now. He took that Alaska cruise with Margaret and enjoyed every moment. But sometimes, late at night, he thinks about those 3 days driving across Montana, Idaho, and Washington with his brother beside him. 3 days stolen from death, a gift he never expected. He doesn't know if Danny found peace wherever he went. He hopes so. He hopes his brother finally made it home, to whatever lies beyond the road, beyond the walking, beyond the endless search. And sometimes, when Thomas is drifting off to sleep, he swears he can hear Danny's voice calling him Tommy, laughing the way he used to laugh, young and alive and free at last from the highway that had held him for so long. Some deliveries take longer than expected. Some routes lead places you never anticipated. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the road gives you one last chance to say the things you never got to say, to share the time that was stolen, to carry someone home. That was Thomas Garrett's last delivery. Not electronics to Seattle, but his brother to peace. And of all the cargo he'd hauled in 42 years, it was the one he was most grateful to have carried. Story 5. The Repeating Mile. Catherine Kate Morrison had been driving professionally for 9 years, specializing in overnight routes that most drivers avoided. She liked the solitude of the night, the empty highways, the way the world seemed to belong only to her between midnight and dawn. At 36, she'd seen her share of weird things on lonely roads. Strange lights in the distance, animals that didn't quite look right, vehicles that appeared and disappeared without logical explanation. She'd learned to note such oddities and move on. The night shift came with mysteries, and dwelling on them led to paranoia. August 3rd, 2019, Kate was hauling produce from Fresno, California to Portland, Oregon. It was a familiar run she'd made dozens of times, mostly traveling on Interstate 5 through the agricultural heart of California before climbing into Oregon. She'd left Fresno at 9 p.m., planning to drive straight through with minimal stops, arriving in Portland by early afternoon the next day. The first 5 hours were normal. Kate listened to a true crime podcast, ate trail mix, and maintained a steady 65 miles per hour. Traffic was sparse, mostly other truckers making the overnight push north. She exchanged occasional CB chatter with a driver hauling lumber, comparing notes on road conditions and discussing an accident that had briefly closed a lane near Red Bluff. At 2:17 a.m., Kate was approaching a stretch of I-5 in Northern California, near the tiny town of Weed. She'd driven this section countless times. Mile marker 7 walk to 747 was a gentle curve through hilly terrain, unremarkable in every way. Forest flanked both sides of the highway, and at this hour, no other vehicles were visible in either direction. Kate passed mile marker 746 and began the curve. Her headlights illuminated the road ahead, the white lines bright against the dark asphalt. And then, with no sense of transition, mile marker 746 appeared again. She blinked, confused. Had she misread the first marker? But no, she distinctly remembered seeing 746, had noted it because she knew a rest area was coming up at 750, and she'd planned to stop there. She must have gotten turned around somehow in her thoughts. Kate continued driving, shaking her head at her inattention. But when the next mile marker appeared 30 seconds later, her stomach dropped. 746. Again. "What the hell?" Kate said aloud. She checked her GPS. It showed her location as mile 747, moving steadily north on I-5. But the physical marker she'd just passed definitely said 746. She grabbed her CB radio. "This is Night Runner. Anybody out there reading me?" Static, then a response. "Night Runner, this is Big Bear. I gotcha. What's up?" "Big Bear. I'm on I-5 northbound near Weed. You anywhere close to my position?" "Negative, Night Runner. I'm down near Redding, about 60 miles south of you. You having trouble?" "I'm seeing weird mile markers. They're repeating. Has anybody reported issues with the signage up here?" "Not that I've heard. Could be vandalism, kids messing around. I wouldn't worry about it too much. Trust your GPS." "Yeah, you're probably right. Thanks, Big Bear." Kate drove on, but her unease was growing. She watched carefully for the next mile marker. When it appeared, her breath caught. 746. For the third time. She looked at her GPS. It still showed her moving steadily north, now displaying mile 748. But the physical marker said 746. Kate's heart rate accelerated. This wasn't vandalism or misreading signs. Something was very wrong. The fourth time she passed mile marker 746, Kate noticed other details. The same curve in the road. The same pattern of trees visible in her headlights. Even the same small piece of tire rubber on the shoulder that she'd noticed the first time. She was looping, somehow driving the same mile of highway over and over, while her GPS insisted she was moving forward. She tried slowing down, thinking maybe she was going too fast to properly perceive what was happening. But at 40 miles per hour, she still passed marker 746 again, and again, and again. Kate's hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. She'd heard stories from other drivers about weird experiences on lonely roads, tales she'd always half dismissed as exhaustion or embellishment. But this was happening to her, right now, undeniably real and utterly inexplicable. On the 10th repetition, she'd started counting. Kate tried stopping completely. She pulled onto the shoulder right at mile marker 746 and put the truck in park. She sat there, engine idling, trying to think rationally. Maybe she was having a medical event. A stroke or an aneurysm could cause perceptual problems. She checked herself carefully. Her vision was clear, her speech normal when she spoke aloud, her coordination fine. She didn't feel ill or confused beyond the impossible situation she was in. After 5 minutes, she put the truck back in gear and continued north. Within a minute, she passed mile marker 746 again. Okay, think, Kate said to herself. What are the variables? What's constant and what changes? The road itself was constant. The same curve, the same scenery, even the same piece of tire rubber. But her truck was moving. The engine was running. The wheels were turning. The GPS showed movement. Time was passing. Her dashboard clock had advanced 23 minutes since this started. So she was moving through space and time, but somehow ending up in the same place over and over. A time loop, like in the movies. Except this wasn't her whole day repeating, just this 1 mile of highway. And she was aware of it, remembering each repetition, which didn't match any time loop story she'd heard. On the 15th repetition, Kate noticed something new. Or rather, she noticed something missing. She'd been alone on this stretch since the loop started, no other vehicles in sight. But now she realized that was strange. Even at 2:30 a.m., I-5 usually had occasional traffic. Where was everyone? She grabbed her CB again. This is Night Runner. Emergency situation. Can anybody hear me? Static. No response. Kate tried different channels, cycling through all 40. Nothing but static and the occasional burst of electronic noise. Help! She shouted into the radio, not caring how she sounded. Somebody please respond. I'm stuck in some kind of loop on I-5 near Weed. Mile marker 746. If anybody can hear this, please answer. Silence. Kate felt panic rising, threatening to overwhelm rational thought. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to think. There had to be a way out. Loops had breaking points, patterns that could be disrupted. What if she didn't follow the road? What if she drove off the highway entirely? On the next repetition, Kate made her decision. As she approached the curve, instead of following it, she steered left onto the shoulder. Her truck bounced over rough ground, and she had to fight to maintain control. She drove parallel to the highway for about 300 yards, then steered back onto the pavement. Mile marker 726 appeared ahead. Kate screamed in frustration, slamming her palm against the steering wheel. Going off-road hadn't helped. The loop pulled her back in, regardless of how she tried to escape. She'd been trapped for 37 minutes now, had passed marker 746 more than 30 times. And a terrible thought was forming. What if she never got out? What if she was stuck driving this same mile of highway forever, aware and conscious, but unable to escape? No, Kate said firmly. No, that's not acceptable. There's a way out. There has to be. She thought about physics, about time and space. In theoretical physics, time loops sometimes had triggers, specific conditions that created them. If she could identify what had triggered this loop, maybe she could undo it. What had she been doing when it started? Driving normally, listening to her podcast, nothing unusual. What had happened right before the first repetition? She tried to remember. She'd been thinking about the rest area at mile 750, about stopping there. She'd checked her fuel gauge, confirming she had enough to make it to Portland without filling up. Wait. She'd checked her fuel gauge, and she'd noticed it was showing just under 3/4 full, which seemed wrong. She'd filled up in Red Bluff less than an hour earlier, and should have had a nearly full tank. Kate looked at her fuel gauge now. 3/4. Exactly where it had been 37 minutes ago, despite her engine running continuously. The truck, she whispered. Something's wrong with the truck. She started paying attention to other details. Her odometer read 182,477 miles. The same reading she'd noticed when the loop started. Her dashboard clock showed 2:54 a.m., but she'd been trapped since 2:17. That was 37 minutes, but her clock had only advanced from 2:17 to 2:54. 37 minutes. Wait, that was right. But it felt wrong somehow. Felt like time should be further along. Then she understood. Her clock was advancing, but only within the loop. Each repetition took about a minute, and she'd been through about 37 loops. From her truck's perspective, 37 minutes had passed. But externally, had any time passed at all? Kate tried something new. She turned off her podcast. Silence filled the cab except for the engine and road noise. And in that silence, she heard something she'd been unconsciously ignoring. A high-pitched electronic whine, almost beyond the range of hearing, emanating from somewhere in the dashboard. She'd heard that sound before, weeks ago, and had mentioned it to the mechanic during her last service. He'd checked and found nothing wrong, suggesting it might be radio interference. Kate had forgotten about it, the sound becoming background noise she no longer consciously noticed. But now, in the loop, the sound seemed more prominent, and it was pulsing, she realized, a rhythm that matched the frequency of the repetitions. Each time she passed mile marker 746, the whine peaked, then faded slightly, then peaked again. Her CB radio. Could it be somehow involved? Kate reached for the CB and turned it off. Immediately, the electronic whine stopped, and the next mile marker that appeared was 747. Kate gasped, nearly swerving in shock. 747, not 746. She'd broken free of the loop. She kept driving, afraid to slow down or stop, afraid the loop would catch her again. Mile marker 748 appeared, then 749, then 750 with its rest area. Kate's entire body was shaking with relief and residual fear. She pulled into the rest area, parked, and sat in stunned silence for 20 minutes. When she finally felt composed enough to move, she got out and inspected her CB radio from the outside. Nothing appeared damaged or unusual. She went inside the rest area building, used the bathroom, and bought coffee from a vending machine. The elderly attendant at the information desk confirmed that, yes, this was I-5 northbound. Yes, the date was August 3rd. And yes, it was about 3:15 a.m. Kate stood outside her truck, drinking terrible coffee and trying to process what had happened. The CB had been part of it somehow. But how? Had it created the loop, or simply anchored her to it? And what had triggered the loop in the first place? She never found satisfying answers. When she had the CB professionally examined in Portland, the technician found nothing wrong. No unusual modifications, no exotic interference patterns, just a standard radio operating normally. Kate completed her delivery and returned to Fresno without further incident. But she never forgot that night. Those 37 minutes trapped in a single mile of highway. She changed her route to avoid that specific section of I-5 near Weed, willing to add time to her drives rather than risk repetition. And she heard from other drivers, eventually. Stories shared in hushed conversations at truck stops. Tales of loops and repeated miles on different highways. A driver who'd circled the same rest area for an hour. Another who'd passed the same overpass 17 times before managing to break free. These stories were always told carefully, testing the listener's reaction, checking for skepticism or mockery. Kate listened to them all. She believed them all. Because she knew that sometimes, for reasons nobody understood, the highway folded back on itself. Space and time got tangled. And if you were unlucky enough to be driving at that exact moment, you could get caught in the knot. There were theories, of course, electromagnetic anomalies, quantum events, dimensional thin spots where the normal rules of physics broke down. Kate read about them, trying to understand, but ultimately none of the explanations felt adequate. They were attempts to rationalize the irrational, to make sense of an experience that defied sense. What Kate knows for certain is this: the world is stranger than anyone fully understands. The highways we drive so confidently, trusting in their solidity and linearity, can betray that trust. And sometimes, despite our maps and GPS systems and carefully measured mile markers, we can end up exactly where we started. Again and again and again. She drives more carefully now, pays closer attention to her instruments and her intuition. And if she ever hears that high-pitched electronic whine again, she'll turn off her CB immediately before the loop can catch her. Because Kate Morrison never wants to spend another 37 minutes driving a single impossible mile, trapped in a repeating nightmare on a lonely highway, wondering if this time she'll escape, or if this time the loop will keep her forever. Some miles are longer than they appear. Some curves don't lead where you expect. And sometimes the only way forward is to recognize when you're going in circles and find the courage to break the pattern, whatever the cost. Story 6. The Child in the Road. Leonard Washington had been a driver for 31 years, and in that time he'd developed instincts that had saved his life more than once. The ability to sense when another driver was about to do something stupid. The awareness of road conditions before they became dangerous. The gut feeling when something wasn't right. These instincts had kept him safe through 3 decades of long-haul trucking, and he trusted them absolutely. Which is why, when every instinct he possessed started screaming at him on the night of March 9th, 2018, Leonard knew he was in serious danger, even before he understood why. He was driving through eastern Tennessee on Highway 40, hauling furniture from North Carolina to Nashville. It was 11:43 p.m., and the road was nearly empty. Leonard had been on the highway for 6 hours, maintaining a steady pace, planning to stop at a truck stop near Knoxville in about 40 minutes. The night was clear, temperature in the low 50s, perfect driving conditions. Leonard had his windows cracked to let in fresh air, jazz playing softly on his radio, and was feeling content in the way long-haul drivers sometimes do, alone, but not lonely, purposeful, at peace with the rhythm of the road. Then his instincts started screaming. Leonard couldn't identify what triggered the feeling. One moment he was relaxed, the next every nerve in his body was on high alert. His hands tightened on the wheel. His eyes scanned the highway ahead, looking for the threat he could feel but not see. And then he saw her. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, standing in the middle of the right lane about 400 yards ahead. She wore a white nightgown, her feet bare, her blonde hair hanging loose around her shoulders. She stood perfectly still, facing Leonard's oncoming truck. And even from a distance, he could see that her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too large, reflecting his headlights like an animal's eyes in the dark. Leonard's first reaction was horror. A child in the middle of the highway at night, in danger of being hit. He began braking immediately, the air system hissing as he carefully brought the truck's momentum under control. 40 tons of truck and cargo couldn't stop instantly, even with good brakes and an alert driver. But as he slowed, approaching the girl, Leonard's instincts kept screaming. Something was wrong. Something beyond the obvious wrongness of a child on the highway. The girl wasn't moving, wasn't showing any reaction to the approaching truck, just standing there, watching. At 200 yards, Leonard could see more details. The nightgown was old-fashioned, with lace trim and buttons, like something from another era. Her skin was too pale, almost glowing in the artificial light. And those eyes, huge and dark, and fixed on Leonard with terrible intensity. At 100 yards, Leonard made a decision. He didn't understand it, didn't question it, just acted on the screaming instinct that said, do not stop, do not get out, do not help this child. He eased the truck into the left lane, giving the girl wide clearance, and maintained his speed. As he passed her, the girl turned her head to follow his movement. Her neck rotated with mechanical precision, far more than human necks were meant to turn, almost all the way around, like an owl. And her mouth opened, impossibly wide, revealing rows of teeth that no human child should possess. Leonard kept driving. His heart hammered in his chest, adrenaline flooding his system, but he kept his foot steady on the accelerator and his hands firm on the wheel. In his side mirror, he watched the girl. She stood for another moment, then began running after his truck. No child could move that fast. The girl covered ground with inhuman speed, closing the distance Leonard had put between them. Her nightgown billowed behind her, her bare feet making no sound Leonard could hear over the diesel engine. But impossibly, incredibly, she was catching up. Leonard pressed down harder on the accelerator, pushing his truck to speeds that were unsafe for the load he was carrying. The speedometer climbed to 75, 80, 85. The girl kept pace, running alongside his truck in the right lane, her face turned toward him with that horrible too-wide smile. "Jesus Christ," Leonard whispered. He grabbed his CB radio with one shaking hand. "Anybody out there? This is Big L. I've got an emergency situation on Highway 40 eastbound, near mile marker 355. Static, then a response. "Big L, this is Rambler. What's your emergency?" "I've got..." Leonard looked in his mirror again. The girl was still there, still running. "I've got something chasing my truck. Some kind of... I don't know what it is. It looks like a little girl, but it's not. It can't be. It's running at 80 miles an hour and it's... Big L, are you feeling all right? Do you need me to call for help?" Leonard could hear the concern in the other driver's voice, the unspoken question. Was Leonard having a breakdown, hallucinating, suffering some kind of medical emergency? And he realized how insane he must sound. "Never mind," Leonard said. "I'm fine. Thought I saw something, but it was just shadows. Sorry to bother you, Rambler." "No worries, Big L. Be safe out there." Leonard set down the radio and focused on driving. The girl was falling behind now, unable to keep pace with his sustained high speed. In his mirrors, he watched as she gradually became smaller, the distance increasing. But she didn't stop running. Even when Leonard could barely see her anymore, just a small, pale figure in the darkness far behind, she was still coming. Leonard drove for another 20 miles at maximum speed before he felt safe enough to slow down. His hands were cramped from gripping the wheel so hard. His jaw ached from clenching his teeth, and he was trembling with the after-effects of terror and adrenaline. He pulled into the truck stop near Knoxville and parked, killing the engine and just sitting in the dark cab for several minutes. What the hell had that been? A hallucination? some kind of elaborate prank. But he'd seen it so clearly, had watched it in his mirrors, had clocked its impossible speed. Leonard got out of his truck on shaky legs and went inside to the restaurant. He ordered coffee and tried to calm down. Other drivers were scattered around the restaurant, the night shift crowd, and Leonard found himself listening to their conversations, hoping to hear someone else mention strange sightings or weird encounters. But the talk was all mundane. Traffic conditions, company complaints, sports scores. He was about to dismiss the whole experience as some kind of stress-induced hallucination when an older driver at the counter turned to him. "You look like you've seen something," the man said. He was probably in his 70s, weathered and lean, with sharp blue eyes. "Bad night?" Leonard hesitated, but something about the old driver's expression, a kind of knowing sympathy, made him answer honestly. "Saw something on the highway, something I can't explain. Probably nothing, just tired." The old driver nodded slowly. "Little girl in a white nightgown?" Leonard felt the blood drain from his face. "How did you—" "Seen her myself, about 15 years back. Same stretch of Highway 40, though a bit further east. Stood in the road, then chased my truck when I drove past." The old driver sipped his coffee. "Name's Earl, by the way. Earl Hutchins." "Leonard Washington. Earl, what the hell is that thing?" "Nobody knows for sure. I've talked to maybe a dozen other drivers over the years who've encountered her. Always the same description. Little blonde girl, nightgown, bare feet, wrong eyes. Always on Highway 40 in eastern Tennessee. Always at night. Some people stop to help. Those people don't tend to talk about what happened after, assuming they're still around to talk." "What happens if you stop?" Earl shrugged. "Don't know. Like I said, people who stop don't usually share the experience. But I know of 3 drivers who disappeared on that stretch of highway over the years. Trucks found abandoned, drivers never located. Could be coincidence. Could be something else. Why doesn't anybody warn people? Put up signs, get the police involved, something. Who'd believe it? You sound crazy talking about a demon child that runs 80 miles an hour. And what evidence is there? The thing doesn't show up every night, maybe not even every week. It's just there sometimes. And if you're unlucky enough to be driving that stretch when it appears, you have a choice. Stop and help what looks like a child in danger, or keep driving and hope your instincts were right." Leonard thought about that, about how his instincts had screamed at him not to stop, not to help, about how if he'd been a slightly more compassionate person, if he'd overridden that gut feeling in favor of doing what seemed like the right thing, he might have stopped, might have gotten out of his truck, might have approached that creature, thinking he was saving a child. "What is it?" Leonard asked. "What's pretending to be a little girl?" Different people have different theories. Some say it's a ghost, spirit of a child, who died on that highway years ago. Others think it's something older, something that was here before the highway was built, and just adapted its hunting technique. I personally lean toward the second theory. Ghosts don't usually have teeth like that. They sat in silence for a while, drinking their coffee. Finally, Earl spoke again. "You did the right thing, not stopping. Trust your instincts, Leonard. The highway will test you sometimes, put things in your path that look like they need helping. But some things don't want help. They want prey. And they're patient enough to wait for the right victim, the one who's tired or compassionate, or slow enough to fall for the trap." Leonard completed his delivery to Nashville the next day and returned home to North Carolina. He told his wife about the encounter, expecting skepticism. Instead, She looked thoughtful, and then showed him something on her computer. News articles about missing drivers in Tennessee. Unsolved disappearances stretching back decades. Not many, just a few every couple of years, but enough to form a pattern if you were looking for one. Leonard kept driving, kept working his routes. But he never took Highway 40 through eastern Tennessee at night again. He adjusted his schedule, took alternate routes, did whatever was necessary to avoid that stretch of road after dark. His dispatcher complained about the inefficiency, but Leonard stood firm. He didn't explain his reasons in detail, just said he preferred other highways. And he started paying attention to the stories other drivers told, in truck stops and on CB radio. The weird encounters, the unexplained sightings, the moments when instincts screamed warnings about things that looked harmless or in need of help. There were more of these stories than Leonard had realized. The highways were full of mysteries, full of things that didn't fit into the normal, rational world. He learned to listen, to believe, and to trust those instincts that had saved him. Because Leonard Washington understood now that there were things out there in the darkness, things that hunted along the loneliest stretches of road, things that wore familiar shapes, children, hitchhikers, people in distress, while hiding monstrous natures beneath. The girl in the nightgown is still out there, Earl had told him before they parted ways. Still standing in the road some nights, waiting for the right victim. She's been there for decades, maybe longer. And she'll be there long after we're both dead, because whatever she is, time doesn't touch her the way it touches us. Leonard thinks about that sometimes, when he's driving late at night on empty highways. Thinks about the girl standing in the dark, patient and timeless, waiting for the next driver, who will override their instincts and stop to help. How many has she caught over the years? How many drivers have made that fatal mistake of compassion? And Leonard wonders about the other things out there, the other hunters wearing innocent faces, waiting along thousands of miles of American highway. Because if one such creature exists, surely there are more. Different shapes, different locations, but the same purpose: to catch the unwary, the compassionate, the unlucky. The road is not safe, not really. It never has been. But most of the dangers are mundane: accidents, weather, mechanical failures, human error. The other dangers, the impossible ones, are rare enough that most people never encounter them. Rare enough that their existence can be dismissed as folklore or hallucination. But Leonard Washington knows better now. He's seen one of those impossibilities with his own eyes, has felt the cold terror of being hunted by something that shouldn't exist. And he carries that knowledge with him every time he drives. A weight that never quite lifts, a vigilance that never quite relaxes. Because some children standing in the road need help. And some need to be driven past without stopping, no matter how wrong that feels, no matter how it haunts you afterward. The trick is knowing which is which before it's too late. Leonard was lucky. His instincts saved him, but he knows, with terrible certainty, that not every driver is that lucky. And somewhere in Tennessee, on some dark stretch of Highway 40, the girl in the white nightgown is standing in the road right now, waiting for the next victim who will make the fatal mistake of stopping. She'll wait as long as it takes. She has nothing but time. And eventually, someone will stop. Someone always does. Story 7. The Vanishing Facility. Martin Kowalski had been driving specialized hazardous materials transport for 23 years, and he took the responsibility seriously. The cargo he hauled required federal certifications, specialized training, and constant vigilance. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and he could cause a disaster that would make headline news. The weight of that responsibility kept Martin sharp, made him double and triple check everything, and gave him a healthy respect for the regulations that governed his profession. On September 27, 2020, Martin was hauling chemical compounds from a facility in Wyoming to a processing plant in Colorado. The cargo was properly contained, secured, and documented. His route would take him southeast through Wyoming and into Colorado, about 8 hours of driving with mandated rest breaks. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. The delivery paperwork specified a facility address in northeastern Colorado, about 40 miles from the Wyoming border. Martin had never delivered to this particular site before, but that wasn't surprising. New facilities opened regularly, and his company serviced dozens of locations across the region. He programmed the address into his GPS, confirmed his fuel was sufficient, and departed the Wyoming facility at 9:15 a.m. The drive through Wyoming was uneventful. Clear weather, light traffic, good road conditions. Martin stopped for lunch at a truck stop in Cheyenne, reviewed his delivery documentation while eating, and continued south into Colorado. According to his GPS, he'd reached the delivery facility around 5:30 p.m., well within his driving time limits. At 5:15 p.m., the GPS indicated his destination was 15 miles ahead. Martin began paying closer attention to his surroundings, looking for landmarks and signage that would indicate the facility. The landscape was typical for this part of Colorado. Rolling plains, occasional clusters of trees, distant mountains on the horizon. Not heavily populated, but not completely remote either. The kind of area where industrial facilities were often located, away from residential zones but still accessible. The GPS directed him off the highway onto a county road. Martin took the exit, noting the road was well-maintained asphalt, 2 lanes with clear striping. A good sign. Facilities handling hazardous materials usually ensured their access roads were properly maintained for safety reasons. After 3 miles on the county road, the GPS directed him onto a smaller side road. This one was also paved but narrower, single lane in each direction. Martin saw a sign, Industrial Complex 5 miles. He continued, confident he was heading in the right direction. The facility appeared exactly where his GPS indicated it should be. A large compound surrounded by security fencing, with a guard station at the entrance. The main building was modern, steel and glass construction, probably built within the last 5 years. Support buildings and storage tanks were visible beyond the fence. Everything looked professional, well-maintained, exactly what Martin expected. He pulled up to the guard station at 5:34 p.m. A security guard emerged, clipboard in hand, and approached Martin's window. "Delivery?" the guard asked. "Yes, sir." "Martin Kowalski, MKT Transport. I've got chemical compounds for processing. Shipping manifest here." Martin handed over his paperwork. The guard reviewed it carefully, then nodded. "Pull through to loading dock 3. It's on your left about 200 yards in. They're expecting you." The gate opened, and Martin drove into the compound. He noted the layout, organized, logical, designed for efficient movement of trucks and materials. Loading Dock 3 was clearly marked, and facility workers were already waiting as Martin backed his truck into position. The unloading process took 90 minutes. The facility workers were professional and efficient, using proper equipment and following safety protocols. Martin supervised the process, as required by regulation, ensuring his cargo was properly transferred and documented. He spoke briefly with the site supervisor, a woman named Karen, who signed the delivery confirmation and provided Martin with his return documentation. "You need a restroom or coffee before you head out?" Karen asked. "We've got facilities in the main building." "No thanks, I'm good. Long drive back, so I'll get started." Martin climbed back into his truck. He exited the facility at 7:11 p.m., according to his logbook. The security guard at the gate waved him through, and Martin headed back down the access road toward the county highway. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Martin felt satisfied with the delivery. Everything completed smoothly and professionally. He reached the county road and turned north toward the highway. His GPS indicated 23 minutes to the highway entrance. Martin settled in for the short drive, planning to stop at the truck stop in Cheyenne for dinner before continuing toward Wyoming. Halfway to the highway, Martin noticed something odd. The industrial complex sign he'd seen on the way in, the one indicating Industrial Complex 5 miles, wasn't there. He must have missed it, not paying attention in the dimming light. But then other things started seeming wrong. The road didn't quite match his memory of the drive-in. A curve that he didn't remember. A section where trees grew close to the road that had seemed more open before. Small things, individually meaningless, but collectively unsettling. Martin told himself he was being paranoid, that the changing light was making familiar things look strange. But his unease grew. Something felt off, though he couldn't articulate what. He reached the highway and turned north. 20 minutes later, he pulled into the truck stop in Cheyenne and parked. The sense of wrongness had faded now that he was back in familiar territory, surrounded by other trucks and the comforting normalcy of the truck stop. Martin went inside, ate a mediocre burger, and got back on the road. The next morning, back at his company's office in Wyoming, Martin turned in his paperwork. The dispatcher reviewed his documents, then frowned. "Martin, what's this delivery location?" "The facility in Colorado, the chemical processing plant. It's all documented there." The dispatcher pulled up something on his computer. "This address doesn't exist." "What do you mean?" "I delivered there yesterday. Took me 8 hours to get there. Made the delivery, got confirmation. It's all in the paperwork." "Martin, I'm looking at Google Maps right now. This address doesn't exist. There's no facility at this location. There's nothing at this location. It's empty land." Martin felt ice forming in his stomach. "That's impossible." "I was there. I spoke to the guards, the facility supervisor, the workers who unloaded the cargo. Here, look, the supervisor signed the confirmation." The dispatcher examined the signature. "Karen Mitchell. You got her business card or contact number?" "No. Didn't think to ask. But the phone number should be on the original shipping order." They pulled up the shipping order. The phone number listed rang to a disconnected recording. The company name on the paperwork, Apex Processing Solutions, returned no results in online searches. No website, no business registration, nothing. "Martin, I'm going to need you to show me exactly where you went." They spent the next 2 hours tracing Martin's route, using his GPS logs and dash camera footage. The logs showed his complete journey: highway exit, county road, access road, arrival at the facility. But when they tried to match the GPS coordinates to online maps, the results were contradictory. According to Google Maps and other mapping services, the coordinates pointed to empty prairie land. No roads, no structures, nothing. The dash camera footage was even more disturbing. Martin had watched it himself, seeing his truck approach the guard station, enter the facility, back up to loading dock 3. But when his dispatcher tried to review the same footage, it showed something different. In the dispatcher's playback, Martin's truck drove down increasingly deteriorated roads, eventually pulling over in what appeared to be an abandoned field. The truck sat stationary for 90 minutes, exactly the time Martin spent at the facility, then drove away. "This doesn't make sense," Martin said, staring at the footage. "I didn't park in a field. I was at the facility. I watched them unload my cargo." "Martin, what did you deliver? What was in your trailer?" They went to inspect Martin's truck. The trailer was empty, exactly as it should be after a successful delivery. But there was no residue, no smell, no trace evidence of the chemical compounds Martin had supposedly transported. The trailer was as clean as if it had never carried anything at all. Over the following week, the situation grew more inexplicable. The company launched an investigation, trying to track down where Martin's cargo had actually gone. The original shipping order had come through normal channels from what appeared to be a legitimate customer, with proper documentation and payment. But when investigators tried to follow up, they hit dead ends. The customer company didn't exist. The payment had been made through an account that was closed immediately after the transaction. The chemicals Martin had picked up in Wyoming were gone, unaccounted for, vanished into a facility that apparently didn't exist. Federal agencies got involved, concerned about missing hazardous materials. Investigators interviewed Martin extensively, reviewing his story, searching for inconsistencies or evidence of criminal activity. They found nothing. Martin's account never changed. His dash camera showed the facility, at least when he viewed the footage, and his GPS logs confirmed his timeline. But none of the external evidence supported his experience. The official conclusion was bureaucratic and unsatisfying. Administrative error. The delivery had been incorrectly documented, the cargo had been rerouted to a different facility, and the confusion resulted from clerical mistakes. The missing chemicals were written off as a paperwork error. Martin was not blamed, but he also wasn't vindicated. But Martin knew what he'd experienced. He'd been to that facility. He'd seen the buildings, the workers, the equipment. He'd spoken to real people, handed them real cargo, received real confirmation of delivery. It had been as solid and tangible as any other delivery he'd made in 23 years. So what had happened? Where had he really been? And where had his cargo gone? Martin started researching on his own, spending hours reading about paranormal phenomena, alternate dimensions, temporal anomalies. He found stories from other drivers about facilities that appeared and disappeared, delivery locations that existed only temporarily, customers who couldn't be contacted after the transaction. These stories were rare and scattered, shared in obscure forums and discussed in hushed conversations at truck stops. But they existed. The prevailing theory among those who believed such things was that certain locations existed in a state of flux, partially in our reality, partially in something else. These liminal spaces could appear solid and real for brief periods, manifesting as buildings or facilities or entire complexes. But they weren't stable. They faded back to wherever they came from, leaving no trace except in the memories of those who'd encountered them. Why would such places exist? Some said they were accidents, glitches in the fabric of reality, where parallel dimensions bled together. Others claimed they were intentional, created by entities or organizations operating between worlds for purposes humans couldn't comprehend. Martin didn't know which explanation, if any, was correct. What he knew was this: somewhere in Colorado, there might be a facility that exists only sometimes, that appears for certain people at certain times, solid enough to drive to, enter, and conduct business in. But that facility is not anchored in our reality the way normal buildings are. It shifts, phases, appears, and disappears, according to rules Martin doesn't understand. And somewhere, his cargo still exists. The chemicals he delivered are in that facility, or were in that facility, or will be in that facility at some time that doesn't align with linear time as humans experience it. The workers who unloaded his truck are real, but they exist in a place that maps can't find and cameras can't consistently record. Martin still drives for his company, still transports hazardous materials, but he approaches every new delivery location with caution now, with awareness that the world is not as solid as it appears. Most facilities are exactly what they seem: concrete and steel and normal reality, built by human hands and recorded in human records. But some, a tiny fraction, are something else. Something that exists in the gaps between here and there, between now and then. He carries a compass now, though he can't articulate why. And he pays attention to subtle signs. Animals behaving strangely. Electrical equipment malfunctioning. That feeling of wrongness that precedes encounters with the impossible. When those signs appear, Martin is careful. He confirms addresses multiple times. He photographs the facilities he visits. He trusts his instincts when they tell him something is off. Because Martin Kowalski has delivered cargo to a place that doesn't exist, has spoken to people who can't be found, has spent 90 minutes in a facility that leaves no trace. And he knows, with absolute certainty, that it could happen again. The vanishing facility is out there, somewhere in the spaces between maps and GPS coordinates. It's waiting for the next driver, who will receive the right delivery order at the right time, who will follow the directions to a location that is real and not real simultaneously. And that driver will complete their delivery, will drive away satisfied, and only later discover that they've been somewhere impossible. Martin hopes whoever that driver is, they'll be better prepared than he was, that they'll document everything, will demand business cards and contact information, will do something to prove to themselves and others that what they experienced was real. But he suspects it won't matter. The vanishing facility doesn't leave evidence. It appears, serves its mysterious purpose, and fades away. And the drivers who encounter it are left with memories that nobody quite believes, documentation that doesn't hold up under scrutiny, and the unsettling knowledge that reality has more layers than anyone admits. Some deliveries are routine, some are challenging, and some, very rarely, are impossible. Martin has made all three kinds, and he carries that knowledge with him every time he climbs into his truck, wondering if today's delivery will be the one that takes him back to the place between places, the facility that exists and doesn't exist, the location that can only be found by those it chooses to reveal itself to. He doesn't want to go back, but he suspects, deep down, that the choice isn't entirely his. Some things, once encountered, maintain a connection, and the vanishing facility knows where to find Martin Kowalski, should it ever need him again.